Welcome everyone to the Martens class story. We're on chapter 13, The Terrible Truth. Emily had to go and help her mum in the kitchen at lunchtime, but with some high velocity potato peeling and turbocharged pastry rolling, she was sitting on her bed rereading Mackie's journal for any further clues when the doorbell rang. "We've got the photo of the coin," Scott shouted as he and Jack hurtled up the 120 stairs to her room. Emily placed the printout on her desk. Colin's photographs showed both sides of the Kruger pond, one above the other. On the tail side was a coat of arms, but it was the head that Emily was interested in. A seriously looking bearded man staring off into the middle of the distance. "That's Paul Kruger," Scott said. "He was the president at the time." "And just look at that nose," Jack added, pointing right at our treasure. Emily read the words printed around the edge of the coin. "Zuid-Afrikaanse Republiek." "That means South African Republic," Scott explained. Jack rolled his eyes. I think Em could probably have guessed that. Emily couldn't take her eyes off the words. All the letters in the code were there. F, B, Z. This had to be the right coin. For a moment she was jubilant. But suddenly her happy bubble popped. Now they'd cracked the code, it just made it even more maddening that they didn't have the map with the rest of the information they needed. It was like doing the whole of the sky on a 1,000-piece jigsaw and then finding out that the straight edges were missing. To find the right starting position, to follow the coin directions, they knew they had to line up the two towers, but they had to be some way of knowing where along the line to stand. Otherwise, it would be like knowing the row but not the column in the game of battleships. That second piece of information had to be in the clues on the map somewhere. On top of that, they could only remember 3 of the coin's directions, F6, Z4 and B3, but there had been several more scribbled in the margins on the map. Emily snatched up her binoculars from her operation kit and stared out through the window across the bay towards Gull Island, her vision blurred by tears of frustration. Maybe Jack was right and they shouldn't waste any more time looking for the map. Deep down she couldn't believe that Mrs. Loveday or Dotty had taken it anyway. Maybe they should just head out to Gull's Island before the map thief beat them to it. As she scanned the bay, Emily spotted a sailing boat. That wasn't so surprising. In good weather, there was always sailing boats out on the bay. What was surprising was that this boat was heading directly towards the shallow waters around Gull Island, where the treacherous reef was avoided by even the most experienced of sailors. Emily adjusted the focus on the binoculars and looked again at the boat. What she saw made her heart jump into her throat. The flag fluttered from the mast bore a familiar design of purple and yellow circles, the logo of Carrickstowe Marina, and there was a big green shape painted on the hull. She handed the binoculars to Jack. "Do you see what I see?" Jack peered through the binoculars. It's a boat." "Not just any boat. It's from Carrickstowe Marina." Jack shrugged. "So?" He turned back from the window and trained the binoculars on Scott's nose. "Here, I can see right up your nostrils into your brain." Emily sighed. "Simon Fox was hiring a boat from Carrickstowe Marina today?" Jack made a puzzled face. "Okay, but how do you know that's him? Carrickstowe Marina probably hires out loads of boats." "I heard him make the booking over the phone this morning. He repeated the name of the boat they were giving him. It was called Green Dolphin." Scott grabbed the binoculars from Jack and looked out to the boat. "You're right. The big green dolphin on the side is a bit of a giveaway." Jack shrugged. "So what's the big deal? Simon Fox has gone out sailing for the day." "To Gull Island?" Emily snapped. Sometimes she was sure Jack acted dense just to wind her up. The hazarded rocks are marked on all the maps. Unless he's a total idiot and has got lost, he's got to have a very good reason for going there. Scott turned to Emily. "You mean?" Yes, Emily said, I do mean. He's searching for our gold. No way, Jack said. He wasn't even there when we found the treasure map. We've been through this before. He tried to go sailing and ended up mooching round Garrickstow all day because of the storm. Scott frowned. He can't have been in Garrickstow all day, though. Remember, Mrs. Loveday said he bought her a Bakewell tart in Dottie's when they were sheltering from the storm. Jack laughed. OK, I admit, that's a bit weird. Why would anyone want to shelter with Mrs. Loveday? Let alone encourage her with cakes. But it's not a crime. Emily closed her eyes to shut out the boys' voices and cast her mind back to the day of the storm. When exactly had Simon appeared back at the lighthouse? We were looking at the map in the dining room. Then Dad came in to set up for dinner, and we cleared everything away. Simon appeared at the front door moments later. What if? Hurry up, she shouted, jumping off her bed and flying down the spiral stairs. Dining room. Experiment. Experiment? Jack's imagination conjured up a picture of Emily in a white coat, her hair sticking out like a mad scientist, telling him he wouldn't feel a thing as she inserted electrodes into his brain. Right, Emily said, once they were all gathered in the dining room. You two sit at this table and pretend to look at the map. Just talk about it in normal voices. Well, as normal as you can manage, she added, looking at Jack. Jack stared at her. And we're doing this because it's a reconstruction, Emily explained. The dining room window is right next to the front door. Maybe Simon Fox arrived back earlier than we thought. Maybe he overheard us talking about the gold as he was about to come in. Then he hung around listening in from outside the window. Scott frowned. I see what you mean, but there were gale force winds. He couldn't have heard us. Not to mention the fact that he'd been blown out to sea. But the storm was over by the time he got back, Jack pointed out. Exactly. Emily hurried across the guest lounge and out to the front door. She looked in through the big conservatory window and gave the boys a thumbs up sign. They started talking and pointing at the imaginary map on the table. She knew they were talking because she could see their lips moving, but she couldn't hear a thing above the usual Castle Key soundtrack of ocean waves and seagulls. The thick reinforced glass in the windows blocked every sound. She went back inside. Can't hear you. Maybe you were talking too quietly. Jack shook his head. Any louder and we've been shouting. Let me try. So Jack went out and stood outside the window while Scott and Emily talked at the table. He came back in shaking his head. The only way Simon Fox could have heard us from outside was if was a trained lip reader. But suddenly Scott leapt up so fast he knocked his chair over. I've got it. Ugh, is it infectious? Jack asked, shrinking away from Scott. Scott ignored him. Don't you remember, Em? Your mum came in and opened all the windows to let in some fresh air when the storm died down. Of course, that's it. Emily ran to the windows and helped Scott throw them all open. Then she dashed back outside. Drift scampered after her. He hadn't figured out the rules of this new running in and out game yet, but it was fun. Gold, treasure, map, island. Can you hear us now? Scott asked in a low voice. Every single word. The three friends looked at each other through the open window. There was a long moment of silence, a moment in which the terrible truth sank in, a moment in which they knew that Simon Fox had stolen the map as surely as if he'd left them a box of Quality Street and a thank you note. Jack sank his head into his hands. He seemed like such a great guy. He bought us chocolates. He talks to old ladies. Even the Hartley Horrors liked him. Scott sighed. And he's been following us, hasn't he? It wasn't a coincidence that he turned up at Dottie's when we were talking to old Bob about the shipwreck. And he was at the Ship and Anchor when we were asking Colin about the coins. Emily pressed her forehead against the warm stone of the lighthouse wall in despair. Even Drift, licking the back of her knees, wasn't helping. The entire investigation had been a disaster from start to finish. How could she have made so many basic mistakes? Overlooking an obvious suspect, leaving vital evidence lying around, slapdash security procedures. All the time they had been running around tailing perfectly innocent people, Simon Fox had been stalking them. Now, not only did he have their map, but he knew how to read the code, and he knew which coin to use. And he was on his way to Gull Island to find the gold. Will they be able to manage to find it before him? Join us next time. Take care.